Focus number 2 with Elizabeth Paepcke and Stacey Standley. 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3.
Focus is sponsored by the following businesses: Whale of a Wash Self-Service Laundry at 415 East Main, the Bank of Aspen at 119 South Mill, and KSNO Radio, 1260 on your AM dial.
Now, you know, I've heard a lot of criticism about the city malls. Do you mind going into this?
No, for sure. One of my favorite topics.
Well, they can criticize it as much as they want, and one person says, oh, the malls should be wider, or they should be narrower, or there should be less trees, or there should be more trees. And I said, look, this is totally unimportant. The thing that is important is that we have malls. And if you look at modern magazines now, when they were doing a survey, I've forgotten which magazine it was in, perhaps you would know, it was either Time or Newsweek. They had the, you know, cities that had really improved themselves. And Boulder, Colorado was one where they formed malls. And Aspen they photographed because it had malls. And this is a place for people to relax in, where restaurants can pull little iron tables out in the summer. And formerly, even in our early days, when with the music school, outside of the Red Onion, they used to play quartets and music there in the summer. When Fritz Benedict first had made the suggestion of their pushing tables out into the street and making this like you would have a street scene in France.
I mean, so we finally caught on 20 years or so later.
Well, these things always, you know, they take time, and one becomes impatient. And I become very impatient, which I shouldn't.
Well, I'm glad that you don't come impatient vocally too often. I'm not sure we could get it all done.
I do sometimes.
You first came to Aspen in, what, 1939?
Yes. Yes, I came here in February of 1939.
And then after the war again is when you brought your husband out, Walter,
yes.
and started looking at the opportunities that the community had?
No, it was his idea, not mine. We had a huge ranch on the eastern slope. Well, I say huge. Compared to ranches such as Bob Anderson owns, after all, he owns over 2 million acres of land in the United States. Our ranch was nothing to talk about. But in the state of Colorado, between Denver and Colorado Springs, ours was quite a large ranch. Originally it was 7,500 acres. And I adored the ranch. And I brought Walter here because I thought it would be lovely to come up here on pack trips. It's ideal country. I'd seen it skiing when I was skiing up here in '39. I thought, this is the most beautiful place I've ever seen, and a ghost town which has never come alive. The same old Victorian buildings, the same, you know, an atmosphere you can't find anywhere else. The movies try to do it by putting, you know, false fronts up in a movie lot, but it isn't the same thing as Aspen was. And
well, then why would a Chicago industrialist, the founder of Container Corporation, decide to put as much energy and time as Walter and you did into the early days of Aspen and the many things that were introduced to the community because of your efforts?
These things don't suddenly jump like Athena from the head of Zeus. they come little by little. And Walter bought a house here in Aspen when I brought him up here in '39 as a joke for me. And he handed me the joke on my breakfast plate, so to speak, and I burst into tears. I didn't want to own anything in Aspen. All I wanted to do was come up here and enjoy it and on a pack trip. But what I knew, the reason why I was so upset was I knew that Walter Paepcke couldn't buy a house up here without doing something about the city of Aspen. You know, people didn't have jobs. They were living on remittance or dole. The mayor of Aspen had no income because no one paid taxes. And so he worked on the ditches. And when I first met him, he had his feet in the ditch and was working the ditches where the Ute Citibank restaurant now is. And I knew that Walter, who was a builder, would come up here and say, people haven't jobs, and jobs could be provided. And so what do? We try and resurrect a certain life in Aspen, which will make jobs possible and make people happy. And Walter had been connected in Chicago with so many things. He was a trustee of the Art Institute. He was a vice president of the Chicago Orchestra. He was a trustee of the University of Chicago. And he was the founder of the Institute of Design there. So we were closely involved in all kinds of city projects, always. And I think both of us had the feeling that you can't be happy without also giving something to a community. Or Walter couldn't own a house up here and just use it as a place that we came to from our branch as sort of a weekend place. I knew that perfectly well, but I also knew that it would be a lot of work.
Well, it seems that, I'm sure that most people know that you and Walter started the Aspen Institute, started the music festival, founded the Aspen Skiing Corporation, sponsored the first International Design Conference, and started Aspen Airways. There's probably 3 or 4 other things that relate to the community that I don't even know about. But what came first, and how did the thing grow in terms of the interest and the spectrum of influence that you've had over the community?
Well, I'd say the very first thing was that we were staying at the Jerome Hotel, which was run by Lawrence Elisha and his wife, and run as well as they were able to run it. But they didn't have the money to run it well. There were only 20 rooms that you could actually sleep in. The rest of the rooms either had no ventilation or the roof was leaking so badly that snow would drift from the 3rd floor of the Jerome Hotel down to the 2nd on the staircase. The first time I went up in '39, that's what I saw. And so it meant rebuilding the Jerome Hotel, putting a swimming pool in. Next to the Jerome Hotel was an empty lot between where the Aspen Times is. And in that empty lot was dumped all the trash anyone had. The Glory Hole was the other place. Under the Glory Hole Motel was this huge pit that was formed by the mine tunnels collapsing. And the bottom of it was filled with railroad cars, with old stoves, with chicken wire, with everything that anyone wanted, and all the garbage. And you can imagine how that smelled on certain warm days in summer. And next to the Jerome, it was a mess. Well, you couldn't run the Jerome Hotel as a hotel and have people looking out of the window on a garbage dump.
Well, that started the Jerome.
So that started the Jerome, but that gave people some jobs. We had to have carpenters. There was no carpenter up here. There was no plumber up here. And we had to bring people in from Glenwood Springs, as far away as on the near Granite, on the other side of Independence, and down the valley. We brought people up here, and also as far away as from our branch, carpenters we'd had there in order to do all this building. And this meant that people suddenly had an income, and that meant that then they should pay taxes, and they had to, and became very conscious of this, because my husband started buying up properties in Aspen, not for ourselves, but in order to have some hold on the city, and buying them up on tax delinquent, what do you call it?
Well, you buy a tax certificate, right.
Tax certificate.
Mm-hmm.
And we bought a great deal of property that way. And then we turned the houses, and I was made an architect for them because I'd studied architecture and design. And I had to do the architecture and the contracting, and I made lots of mistakes because the plumber's name was Eichler, the worst plumber I've ever come in contact with. He used to put elbows into pipes that would have holes the size of a quarter in them, and he did that over in the Floridora, where Helmut Schlaffer is now building his restaurant, taking that old house.
Mm-hmm.
And I put all the plumbing in that house, and that was our first guest house before we had remodeled the Jerome. Well, now you had to have, you see, first some place for people to stay, otherwise you couldn't put anyone on the ski slopes in winter. Campers could come up here and pitch tent in summer and go horseback riding and fishing, but there was no place for anyone to stay, or not enough people. And that was the problem. And so one step led to another. Then you bring people in here. And then what do you do with them? You want to give them something besides just skiing and playing, and if you just do that in your life, or just working, you begin snarling and biting each other. So that gave us the idea of bringing in music, and Walter and I were both very much involved with the music in Chicago.
Well, did the skiing start first, or did the Institute and the music start first?
No, I would say that skiing was here always to a certain extent, but it meant climbing. When I was here in '39, we were herded into a truck in front of the Jerome Hotel, I think at 5 or 6 in the morning, with the miners that operated the Midnight Mine on the back side of Aspen Mountain.
Mm-hmm.
You know that road that winds up there to...
Up to Little Annie Basin.
Well, it winds up to Little Annie, but the Midnight Mine was halfway up.
Right.
And the truck took us, herded like cattle, the miners and our friends, the Munsons and me, in '39, and brought the tailgate up, you know, so that we wouldn't fall out. And we held our skis, and we had seal skins to put onto our skis when we arrived at the Midnight Mine. And then you herringboned up the mountain to the back. And then if you were a good skier, you went down the corkscrew in front and landed in front of the Opera House, because there was nothing between the slopes to the Opera House.
And that's when the Red Onion was still Johnny Litchfield's?
The Red Onion in the beginning belonged to, I don't know who the first onion, that was before. And then Johnny Litchfield got it after '45. He was in the Mountain Troops. And he bought it after '45 from the original owner. There was only the center building in the beginning, with that bar with all the photographs of the prize fighters and ladies in tights.
Right. And then it seems to me I recall that Werner Kuster and Arnold came over here to work at the Hotel Jerome for
yes,
you and Walter?
Walter got them from the Barrow Lock in Zurich. And they came over and worked in the Jerome Hotel, as did Walter Huber.
And then they eventually broke out
and then they all
started.
made so much money that they began, you know, itching for their own restaurants or their own shops or something, and that is how we lost them. And Werner Kuster was very good and wonderful sense of humor, which he still retains.
Well, then how did the Institute get started? You had the
Well,
skiing.
you see, because as I say, Walter felt, and that the Greeks had the first idea that man's life had to be made up of work so that he could have a roof over his head and clothing on his back and food in his stomach. And then beyond that, he had to He had to have play. Play is what we call recreation, you know, something. So we recreate ourselves by playing, going out skiing, fishing, horseback riding, and all the rest. But if you only do those two things, then your life is pretty flat. And in order to do something more for you, you had to have music, you had to have the whole spiritual world, which is a possibility within every man, renewed. And that is why we brought the music here and the design conference and everything, and the Aspen Institute was founded after the Goethe Festival. But first we had great books.
Well, you date back to those events, which were between 1946 and about 1949, in other words, 30
Yes.
years. And Walter died in 1960, is that right?
Yes.
And you've carried on for the 18 years since then.
Well, my little part, fighting many periphery issues.
I think many of us feel there's been more than a little part, but
Yeah.
regardless of that, has Aspen turned out the way that you envisioned that it would as a result of the early impact and the early dreams that
No.
were started?
I think if Walter were living today, he wouldn't be able, if he suddenly came back, he wouldn't be able to believe the financial success of Aspen. But he also would say it's the thing that is happening to all of America as a whole, and that is we're too rich. We have too many good things. This morning there was a broadcast, and to which I listen always in the morning around 8 o'clock. And they were talking about the fact that they couldn't get dishwashers or employees. And they were blaming it all on the fact that they couldn't get ski passes on the mountain. Well, there were other voices that said the opposite. But this is ridiculous. The same thing holds true in Chicago, Illinois, or in New York, or any other city you can take. A restaurant has a terrible time getting anyone who's willing to wash a dish, since we have, we're supported whether we work or not. There are many people who just don't want to work. They're lazy. Now, not everyone at all. It's a minority, but there is a minority. And the people who drift out here to Aspen would much rather go skiing than they would washing a dish. I don't blame them. But on the other hand, I think America has to change the whole point of view towards work. This is really a problem. All work is worthwhile. There is nothing that I haven't been willing to do, from emptying bedpans to cleaning turds to out of stable yards to digging ditches to stringing fence wire to doing everything. If you run a ranch, you can't run a ranch without doing what you demand of the least workman on that ranch. And I think this is something that young people have to learn.
Well, coming back from a national perspective back to
But I think
Aspen.
I think it's very true of Aspen.
Well, I think so. I think that Aspen in many ways reflects a microcosm of other parts of
Yes.
the country. But in terms of how you envisioned what the end result of these early efforts were going to be. In other words, every one of them has changed. Aspen Airlines is now a very big, successful airline. The Aspen Institute has got campuses in 3 or 4 countries. The Aspen Skiing Corporation has recently been acquired by 20th Century Fox. The music festival is much bigger, I'm sure, than you ever envisioned, with over 800 students during the summer. Ballet West is now a resident of the community during the summer. Snowmass has become a major town and resort all of its own. Did you see that this would be the kind of a series of events that would occur?
Of course not. Of course not. Because all Walter wanted to do was make people who were living in Aspen, the permanent residents of Aspen, happy, which he felt they weren't before. And he really felt very strongly that work, play, and leisure, which is the Greek idea of leisure, that means the renewal of the spiritual side of you, was important to make a man happy. And this, after all, is what the Greeks published and spoke about 2,000 years ago. They didn't publish, but they wrote on tablets.
Do you think that the success that Aspen has had, as you said, that Walter would be amazed at the financial success, has somehow compromised the values or the quality of this as a community?
Yes, in a measure it has. Walter never wanted Independence Pass, for instance, to be paved because as long as Aspen was a dead end in winter, people came up here and it was harder to get out of Aspen. In other words, you couldn't have a Bundy going over Independence Pass and escaping that way. Well, I mean, that's an extreme case. But this is what we had in mind, because I had grown up in Estes Park in the summers, and there I saw what happened to Estes due to the fact that they built the high drive and up over the pass, and the result was that people came into Estes Park, spent $1.75 for a hot dog, and went right on driving over to Grand Lake and back to Denver by evening. And this is the one thing that Walter didn't want to have happen. He wanted to make it so inaccessible and so difficult for people to get here that when they came here, they'd really stay.
It seems to me that a mayor not too long ago made the same comment and used the same example of the hot dog and when they were discussing paving Independence Pass back about 1967.
Well,
he lost his job for it, as I recall, but
well, that may be so. I remember I was vociferous on the subject also.
Well, I think in retrospect, we probably all agreed with that decision, that he was right and perhaps paving the pass was wrong. But what about the other changes?
Well, I'm sure that Walter would be only too happy about seeing what's happened to the mall. We tried to bring this about years and years and years ago, but the citizens of Aspen all voted against it. In fact, the Aspen Institute paid Paul Wiener to come, the German architect, to come out here at the suggestion of Herbert Bayer and do a city plan in which there was a parking lot, a circular parking lot below lift number 1 and one below Little Nell. And it was an ideal plan so that you'd have enough parking space. Formerly, people just parked up and down the streets, and there were no parking lots or anything. And it was a mess. It's beginning to be a mess again. I know that you're fighting it, and the city council and the county are having difficulties. But there have to be places for people to park, or there has to be a different form of transportation. Now, the early city of Aspen had a streetcar that took people back and forth. And it might be fun to have a streetcar once more. Well, that subject was brought up and then found rather impossible, but Harry Weiss still believed it could be done out to the airport, an electric car. And the early railroad, which I used to love to take from Glenwood Springs up here, although it was much longer, but it was fun. Tracks were pulled up.
Maybe eventually we'll go full circle and
Perhaps
come back
we
to
will.
some of those, the ideas
Perhaps
of
we will.
the technology may not have changed as quickly as we thought that it has. Well, how do you personally feel now? I mean, you still spend a great deal of time in Aspen. You still consider it your home after Chicago. Do you enjoy Aspen as much now as you used to? Because of Aspen, not because of changes that may have occurred in you?
I don't know. It's hard to tell. You know, I really become, but that's me and what I've lived through. The early days when I had to cook on a coal stove, into which we put coal and wood in the morning, and that was the only way we got hot water in the house. Somehow we've lost something, I feel. It was, I don't know how to explain it. The pleasures were simpler. We didn't demand a paragon or even the Crystal Palace, which I adore, and I think the greatest asset. I'm not arguing against that. I'm just saying that our enjoyments were simpler, and we got to bed earlier, and were able to ski better, I think, because our life was just a lot simpler. Now that part I really miss. On the other hand, there are all kinds of amenities which are marvelous. You know, the fact that I can watch TV and see now because of the relay station isn't it on which mountain above?
Smuggler Mountain.
Smuggler Mountain. Now I can see what is happening news at any time of the day on Channel 11.
But are you sure that you want to do that? I mean, one of the things of Aspen is the fact that it was a dead-end resort that was
yes, but the whole
isolated.
world, you see, was isolated in those days, more isolated than we are now. And I wonder, I really find myself going to the TV and plugging in on Channel 11. I find myself wanting weather reports, but wanting the news.
Well, if you were 20 years younger, would you take it all on again and walk the path that you've done here in Aspen over the years?
I don't know. I love it, our ranch, so that I don't know whether I would have done it.
Are you glad that you've done it?
Yes, of course. It's enriched my life. What else could I say?
Well, I think that's adequate. I think that we've all that live here feel it's certainly
Yes.
enriched our lives.
And I'm proud of the music here in summer. I'm proud of so many things. The Pathobiology Institute, I think, is such an addition. I think even ACES, you know, the Aspen Center for Environmental Studies, what it does for the school children here.
Well, I think that in all, we've probably got one of the better communities in the country. And I think that we're all very proud of our town, and we're proud that we have somebody like you as one of the patrons of the community.
Well, anyway, I'm very happy about many, many things. I may grouse about a good deal, but you know, in the end, all I need to do is to look out on those blue spruce in my garden, in winter hanging with snow, or in the summer, look out on everything burgeoning and the green, first sticky green leaves coming out on the aspen trees and that blue sky and those mountains. And I say, you know, what can be wrong? They can never change.
That's true. Thank you for spending a wonderful evening with us. We appreciate it.
Well, I've enjoyed every minute.
Focus is sponsored by the following businesses: Whale of a Wash Self-Service Laundry at 415 East Main, the Bank of Aspen at 119 South Mill, and KSNO Radio, 1260 on your AM dial.